I found my medical records in a locked drawer. What I read changed everything. My parents faked my mental illness for money. I exposed them, sent them to prison. But sometimes, I still hear their voices in my head. You ever have that moment where everything just snaps? Where years of confusion suddenly make sense in the worst possible way? For me, that moment came when I was 16 years old. I was trying to get my first real job for the summer, and I needed my birth certificate. Mom casually told me it might be in Dad's office. You know, the one that was always off limits. Private business stuff, he used to say, like I was some kind of hacker instead of his daughter. But that weekend, they were both out at my little brother's baseball tournament. I had the house to myself and a deadline, so I went in. The man kept a filing system like a lawyer. Neatly labeled, color-coded folders. It didn't take long to find one with my name on it. And it was thick. Way too thick for someone who hadn't even lived 2 full decades. I opened it, expecting to find a birth certificate and maybe a few school forms. But what I found? Pages upon pages of medical documents, psychiatric evaluations, drug trials, behavioral reports. Diagnoses I didn't even recognize. Oppositional defiant disorder. Intermittent explosive disorder. Early onset bipolar. According to these files, I was an unhinged, violent child in desperate need of medication and constant monitoring. I just sat there, frozen, because I remembered being 7 years old. I wasn't some wild, raging kid. I was quiet, bookish. I spent more time with dragons in fantasy novels than I did with actual people. But it got worse. I flipped to the back, and that's when I saw them. Government checks, receipts, over 12 years' worth of disability payments. My parents had been collecting money for my condition, more than $180,000 in total. They'd claimed I couldn't attend regular school, couldn't be in public without supervision. But here's the thing, I'd never even seen a therapist. Not once. I hadn't been medicated. No counseling. No doctor visits I could remember that matched any of what these documents said. And every single report had been signed by someone named Dr. Quentin Ashworth. So I Googled him, and guess what? He'd lost his medical license 3 years ago for, you guessed it, falsifying psychiatric records. My hands were shaking. I took photos of everything, every lie, every forged signature, every piece of evidence they'd used to turn me into a cash cow. Then I heard it, the garage door. They were home. I threw the papers back into the folder, slid it into the drawer, and rushed to the kitchen. When they walked in, I was sitting there, looking like I was just doing some light algebra homework. Mom asked, "Find what you needed?" And I looked her dead in the eye. "Actually, yeah," I said. "I found exactly what I needed." Later that night, we were at dinner. Same routine. Dad criticizing me, lecturing me about my bad attitude. How hard it was to raise someone with issues. But this time, I didn't take it. This time, I cut him off. "Speaking of my issues," I said, pulling out my phone, "I've been meaning to talk to you both about my medical history, specifically with Dr. Ashworth." You could have heard a pin drop. Dad froze mid-bite. Mom's face went sheet white. "I'm especially curious," I continued, "how he managed to diagnose me while he was suspended for fraud. Oh, and how you've been cashing disability checks for conditions I don't actually have." Dead silence. Then Dad finally speaks. "You don't understand the complexities." "Really?" "Because I understand theft and fraud, and I definitely understand what it means to be used." Mom burst into tears. "We needed the money. Your father's firm was collapsing. So you used me." "We used the system," Dad snapped, voice hardening. "And what about my reputation?" I said. "You made everyone believe I was unstable, dangerous. Even teachers, family, friends, me." I stood up, phone still in hand. "I'm 17 now. I could say I was manipulated, get these records sealed, disappear. But no, I'm not hiding this. I want the world to see who you really are." That's when Dad lunged, right across the table. But I was faster. "You won't get it," I said, backing up. "I've already uploaded everything. Photos, evidence, cloud storage. and I've sent it to someone you'll be meeting very, very soon. The doorbell rang. I opened it to a woman in a navy blazer flashing a badge. "Good evening," she said. "Agent Cordelia Thorne, State Fraud Investigation Unit. I believe you called about some documents." Mom collapsed back into her chair. Dad's face turned the color of a plum. But then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. "Nobody's going anywhere," he said, calm as ice. Agent Thorne backed up, drawing her own weapon in a blink. "Sir, put the firearm down now. This is a family matter," he growled. "In all my careful planning, I hadn't considered this." He was shaking. The gun trembled in his hand. I couldn't tell if it was fear or rage. I swallowed. "Cordelia," I said slowly, "there's something else you need to know." Dad whipped his head toward me. "Shut up." But I kept going. "The fraud? That's just part one. You need to check the basement. Storage room behind the water heater." Mom gasped like she'd just been stabbed. Dad's expression went from furious to pale. "What's in the basement?" Agent Thorne asked, gun still trained on him. "Client records," I said. "Financial fraud. Stolen funds from Dad's accounting firm. Money that never reached his clients." Dad's gun dipped slightly. "How would you know that?" he whispered. I looked him right in the eye. "Because I've been watching you. Every late night. Every shredder session. Every lie. I've got it all." That was half true, honestly. But I'd suspected something for months. Our lifestyle didn't make sense. Mom had a new Mercedes. We lived in a house worth over $400,000. Dad said his business was failing. It didn't add up. "You were embezzling," I said. "That's why you needed the disability scam. To explain all the extra cash." Agent Thorne started to move her hand toward her radio. "Dispatch. I need backup units at this location." "Don't you dare," Dad roared, turning the gun toward her. And I did something so reckless I still don't fully understand it. I stepped between them. "Stop," I said. "Please. It's over." And for a second he just stared at me. This man who'd raised me, who used to fix my bike, who taught me to tie my shoes, who'd also turned me into a lie for 12 straight years. "You were supposed to be grateful," he said, voice shaking. "We gave you everything." "No," I said quietly. "You gave me lies." Behind me, Agent Thorne was whispering into her radio. "Domestic disturbance. Armed suspect. Immediate backup needed." Dad's hands trembled harder. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said. "Then put it down," I told him. "I can't go to prison. You don't know what happens in there. To people like me." "People like you?" I asked, voice rising. "You mean white-collar criminals? Or parents who exploit their kids?" His voice cracked. He knew exactly what I meant. Sirens howled in the distance. Red and blue lights flashed across our front windows. "We could run," he said suddenly. "Desperate. All of us. Tonight. I have money. We could start fresh." "No," I said. "No." He sounded hurt. Genuinely hurt. "No more running. No more lies. No more stealing." The sirens got louder. Closer. "Please," he begged. "I'm your father." I stared him dead in the eyes. "No. A real father protects his child. You used me." The front door crashed open. 3 officers burst in. Tactical gear. Weapons raised. "Drop the gun," one of them shouted. Dad looked at me one last time. And then, he set it down. They tackled him instantly. Agent Thorne took the weapon. Mom didn't move. She just sat there sobbing. "You okay?" Thorne asked me. I nodded. Kind of. Physically. Sure. But when your dad points a gun at a federal agent, yeah, you're never really the same after that. "We need to process the scene," she said. "But first, what's in the basement?" I took her down to the storage area. Behind the water heater, just like I said, was a fireproof safe. Combination? Our old address. Dad wasn't as clever as he thought. Inside were files. Dozens. Forged transfers. Stolen investments. Retirement funds. Fake names. Fake accounts. Over $2.3 million. Gone. Agent Thorne was stunned. How long have you known? A while, I said. I noticed things didn't add up. The lifestyle, the lies, and once I found the disability fraud, everything clicked. She looked at me, eyes wide. You're only 17? I nodded. What you did tonight was incredibly brave, she said, and incredibly reckless. Never put yourself between a gun and a badge again. I shrugged. I just wanted him to stop. She looked around the basement, then back at me. He will now. Upstairs, I watched from behind the blinds as they loaded my dad into the back of a patrol car. His eyes found mine through the window, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just a hollow kind of stillness. Like the part of me that used to care had already died a long time ago. Back inside, Mom was curled up on the living room couch, tears streaking down her cheeks. She looked small, crushed. I stood there for a moment, then finally asked, "Did you know?" She didn't even look at me at first. But when she finally did, her eyes were swollen, her voice cracked. I suspected. About the business stuff. But the disability money, I thought that was just creative accounting. I blinked. Did she really just say that? Creative accounting? I repeated, stunned. You ruined my name, my future. You stole money from the government and painted me as a mentally unstable freak, and you're calling it creative accounting. She looked like she might collapse in on herself. We were going to pay it back. Eventually. After you graduated. After you got married. Had kids. And they'd grow up thinking their mother was some mentally ill basket case? I asked. That sound like a solid plan to you? She didn't answer. What could she possibly say? That's when Agent Thorne returned to the room. We'll need both of you at the station, she said. Statements, processing, and the house will be secured as a crime scene. I glanced around at the only home I'd ever known. Where am I supposed to go? Do you have family? Anyone who could take you in temporarily? My mind went to Marcus, my older brother. He was 2 years ahead of me, already in college. Dad's favorite. The perfect son. Would he even believe any of this? I'll figure something out, I said. The next few hours were a whirlwind of interviews, paperwork, formal questions. I told them everything, from finding the medical records, to my growing suspicions about Dad's finances, to the years of being branded the problem child. Sometime around 2 a.m., a social worker arrived. Ms. Chin, soft-spoken but sharp. Under normal circumstances, she told me, we'd place you in emergency foster care, but given your age and situation, we can look at other options. Is there anywhere safe you can stay tonight? I gave her Marcus's number. He answered on the third ring. Groggy. Confused. What do you mean Dad was arrested? He asked, his voice climbing. For what? Fraud. Embezzlement. He pulled a gun, Marcus. There was silence on the other end. This has to be some kind of mistake, he finally said. It's not, I replied. I have the proof. Wait, you have proof? What the hell have you been doing? So I told him about the forged diagnoses, the fake psychiatrist, the disability scam, all of it. When I finished, he said just one word, Jesus. How long have you known? Yesterday, I said. I made the call this morning. You turned them in? I turned in criminals, I said calmly. They just happened to be our parents. More silence. And then, come stay with me, he said. I'll drive down and get you. You believe me? He paused, then said something that nearly broke me. I always knew something didn't make sense. You weren't violent. You weren't unstable. You were quiet, thoughtful. You loved books. I just never imagined it was this. 3 hours later, Marcus pulled up to the station. He looked exhausted, pale, but he hugged me in the lobby like he hadn't seen me in years. You okay? He asked softly. I don't know, I said, and I meant it. The drive to his apartment was mostly silent. He lived in a cramped off-campus unit with 2 roommates who, bless them, didn't ask many questions. Just nodded when Marcus told them it was an emergency. You can take my room, he said. I'll sleep on the couch. I lay in his bed that night, staring at the ceiling, completely untethered. Who was I if I wasn't the unstable one? Who was I without the diagnoses? Without the label? Was there even a version of me that wasn't broken? Marcus, I called out. Yeah. What do you remember about me? Before all the medical stuff. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You were sweet, he said. Really smart. Curious. You asked so many questions. And you always had a book. Drove Mom nuts. 'Cause you'd rather stay inside and read than go outside and play. That doesn't sound like someone with intermittent explosive disorder. No, it really doesn't, he said quietly. I should have said something. I should have asked questions. You were just a kid too. Maybe. But even when I was 9, I knew something didn't add up. The next morning, he brewed us some terrible college coffee, and we sat at the tiny kitchen table, still trying to make sense of everything. So what now? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. Finish high school, I guess. Try to figure out who I actually am. He raised an eyebrow. Have you thought about college? I actually laughed. With what money? And what GPA? Try getting straight A's when your parents tell everyone you're mentally unstable. You could apply as an emancipated minor. Get financial aid. Start over. I hadn't even considered that. Legal independence, it was terrifying, but also strangely freeing. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Agent Thorne. Can you come in today? We need to go through more documents. At the federal building, she met me at the entrance and led me to a room full of evidence boxes. She pointed to the nearest one. Your dad's accounting records paint quite a picture. We've traced this back over 5 years. So far, we've identified 47 victims. 47. Retirees. Small business owners. People who trusted him with their life savings. She opened a file. Eleanor Whitfield, 73. She lost $180,000, her entire retirement. She's working part-time at a grocery store now just to pay rent. I felt sick. There's more, she said. He had fake passports, offshore accounts. He was planning to leave the country. If you hadn't acted when you did, he could have vanished with millions more. She showed me forged documents, bank transfers, an entire escape plan. He was going to disappear. Leave me, leave Marcus. Probably leave Mom, too. What happens to the victims? I asked. We'll try to recover what we can, she said gently. But realistically, most of that money is gone. They may never get it back. The weight of it hit me. 47 lives shattered by one man's greed. And the disability fraud? I asked. That's where you come in, she said. We'll need your testimony about the impact on your life. In court. Yes, eventually. But first, we need your story documented. Everything. The emotional toll, the academic setbacks, the social fallout. Those fake diagnoses didn't just steal money, they were child abuse. Child abuse. I'd never thought of it in those words before. But she was right. They hadn't just scammed the system. They'd rewritten my entire identity. Turned me into a lie. I'll do it, I said. Whatever you need. Good. She nodded. We're going to make sure this doesn't happen to another kid. Over the next several weeks, I told my story again and again. Every memory. Every time a teacher looked at me like I was dangerous. Every time a parent told their kid not to play with me. Every time I was excluded, isolated, dismissed because of the diagnoses I never actually had. I talked about the gaslighting. About being told that my feelings weren't real, just symptoms. That my doubts were just more proof that I was unstable. And slowly, something began to shift. Because for the first time in my life, people were listening. Believing me. My voice mattered. When it came time for sentencing, Dad pled guilty to 23 counts of embezzlement and fraud. Mom cut a deal, 3 years probation and 1,000 hours of community service for her role in the disability scam. At the hearing, I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I stood in that courtroom, heart pounding, and read from the paper in my hand. For 12 years, my parents told the world I was mentally ill. They convinced my teachers, my classmates, even our family. They took money from the government, built their lives around a lie at my expense. But the real cost wasn't financial. It was emotional, psychological. I believed them. I thought I was broken. I missed out on friendships, opportunities, a normal teenage life because I believed I wasn't capable, that I wasn't safe. They didn't just steal from taxpayers. They stole me, my confidence, my voice, my future. But not anymore. I am not dangerous. I am not defective. I am not the lie they created. I am just a kid who was abused, and who finally fought back. When I finished, Dad was crying. Mom couldn't meet my eyes. And the judge? He looked like he was ready to explode. In all my years on this bench, he said, I have rarely seen such a calculated, cold-blooded betrayal of parental duty. You didn't just commit fraud. You waged psychological war against your own child. And for once, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel unstable. I felt powerful. I had taken my life back. After the sentencing hearing, Agent Thorne surprised me with something unexpected. Come on, she said. Let's grab a coffee. We found a quiet little place down the block from the courthouse. She didn't say anything for a while, just stirred her drink and watched me over the rim of her cup. Then she asked, So, what's next for you? That question had been living in the back of my mind for months, but now felt real. I'm gonna finish high school, I said. File for emancipation, apply to college as an independent student. And maybe I'll study criminal justice. She raised an eyebrow. Because of all this? Yeah, I nodded. Because of everything. I want to help kids like me, the ones who are being used by their parents. I want to make sure people like Eleanor Whitfield get justice. She gave me this warm, genuine smile. You'd make an excellent investigator. I blinked. Really? Really? You've got instinct. You notice details. And most importantly, you've got the guts to do what's right, even when it's the hardest thing in the world. 6 months later, I crossed the stage with a 3.8 GPA. My real GPA, not one inflated or deflated by fake accommodations or made-up learning disabilities. I'd been accepted to 3 different universities, all with full financial aid. And Marcus, my brother, he helped me move into my dorm. As we unpacked boxes and made the twin bed with cheap sheets, he turned to me and said, I'm proud of you. What you did. It took serious strength. I shrugged. I just did what had to be done. He shook his head. Most people wouldn't have. Most people would have stayed quiet. To protect the family. They weren't protecting me, I said. So why should I protect them? Freshman year was weird at first. For the first time in my life, I was just a regular student. No secret labels. No whispered warnings from teachers. No one watching me like I was a ticking time bomb. I joined the debate team and discovered I actually loved structured arguments. I made friends, real friends. Once I stopped expecting them to ghost me for being unstable. I even started dating a little, though trust was still a slow, uphill climb. My criminal justice classes were where I came alive. I wrote paper after paper on financial abuse, child exploitation, fraud. My professors were stunned by how deeply I understood the subject matter. One day after class, Professor Martinez pulled me aside. You ever think about grad school? He asked. I blinked. I'm a freshman. I know, he said, but you have insight most people never get. Lived experience with white-collar crime, especially its impact on minors. That's rare. And valuable. I hadn't thought about grad school. Not seriously. Not yet. But that changed during spring break of my sophomore year. I was crashing at Marcus's apartment when there was a knock at the door. I opened it and there she was, Agent Thorne, wearing her usual blazer and that calm, unreadable expression. Her badge glinted in the sunlight. Sorry for the unannounced visit, she said. I stepped back to let her in. Is something wrong? Did something happen with the case? She nodded. Actually, yes. We've uncovered a much bigger operation. Your father wasn't working alone. She laid it all out. My dad's fraud, his lies, they were just one part of a massive web. Other financial advisors, medical professionals, government workers. It wasn't just disability scams anymore. The same fake diagnoses were being used for all kinds of exploitation, insurance fraud, educational loopholes, even custody battles. "We've found over 200 children," she said, "all of them given false psychiatric labels. Some are being used for benefits, some to manipulate legal systems. Most of them have no idea." I just sat there, numb. 200 kids. 200 kids like me, still being told they were broken, still being punished for something they didn't do, living in the same fog of shame and confusion I'd lived in for years. She placed a thick folder on the table, stuffed with documents, photos, evidence. "We want your help," she said. "Help how?" "As a consultant," she replied. "You understand this from the inside. You can help us build better protocols, spot the red flags, figure out how these patterns form. Eventually, maybe even testify before Congress." "Congress?" I echoed. She nodded. "This is a federal issue now. It's bigger than we imagined." I stared at the folder. Pictures of children, medical charts, forged documents, bank statements. "These kids," I said, my voice barely steady. "Do they even know what's happening to them?" "Most don't," she admitted. "They're still trapped in the narrative their parents gave them." I felt it then, that fury in my chest. Hot and sharp. How dare they? How many childhoods had been stolen while no one looked? "What would you need me to do?" I asked. "Help us develop investigative procedures, review cases, offer insight from the victim's side, and, if you're willing, prepare for possible testimony on a national level." I sat there for a long time, thinking about those kids, about Eleanor Whitfield bagging groceries at 73, about my own life, about the years I spent convinced I was unlovable, untrustworthy, unwell. "When do we start?" I asked. "Now," she said. "If you're ready." I spent the rest of that week in Agent Thorne's field office, combing through files, learning how investigators think, how fraud patterns form, the sheer scale of what we uncovered. It was nauseating. Millions stolen, families torn apart, children psychologically branded for life. But what hit me hardest? How similar the stories were. Quiet kids, smart kids, suddenly diagnosed with extreme behavioral issues. Parents living way beyond their apparent income. Medical professionals popping up in multiple states. The same phrases, same treatments, same symptoms. "The red flags are obvious once you know where to look," I told Agent Thorne. "That's the thing about financial abuse," she said. "It hides in plain sight. People trust parents to do what's right for their kids. But some parents," she didn't have to finish, "some parents turn their kids into commodities." That work changed everything for me. I shifted my major. Double, criminal justice and psychology. I focused hard on white-collar crime, child abuse, systemic exploitation. My professors were fascinated. "You don't just study this," Dr. Rodriguez said once. "You lived it." Sometimes I wonder if that makes me too close, I admitted, or exactly the right person. Junior year, I was invited to speak at a national conference on financial crimes. The room was packed, FBI agents, prosecutors, social workers, child advocates. I told my story, the lies, the diagnosis, the gun, the fallout. When I finished, there was silence. Then a woman in the back raised her hand. "How do we find these children?" she asked. "The ones still living it? If they don't even know they're victims?" I took a breath. I'd been waiting for this question. "Look for the disconnect," I said. "Kids whose disorders don't match their behavior, who are kept out of normal activities, whose parents seem to benefit financially from their condition." "But what if the kids don't speak up?" "They can't," I said. "Most of us are told we're liars, manipulative, sick. We don't trust ourselves, let alone the system. Then how? Follow the money, check credentials, cross-reference medical claims with spending habits. The fraud leaves footprints, even when we can't." Afterward, I was swarmed. Questions, business cards, job offers, People wanting me to train their teams, consult, teach. Agent Thorne found me in the lobby. How does it feel to be in demand? She asked with a smirk. Honestly, overwhelming. Well, she said, I have one more proposition. I raised an eyebrow. Another one? The FBI has a grad school program, she said. They fund your advanced degrees, then you join as a specialist in child financial crimes. You'd get your master's, maybe even a PhD, then train at Quantico. Me? I asked. An agent. You'd be phenomenal, she said. Think about it. You'd be protecting kids from going through what you did. That night I called Marcus. You're not going to believe this, I said. Try me. The FBI wants to recruit me. He went silent for a moment. Then, that's amazing. Are you going to say yes? I didn't answer right away. I'd been asking myself the same question all day. But deep down I knew. Yeah, I said. I think I am. It feels like everything that happened, it all led here. Then do it, Marcus said. Turn all that pain into something that helps people. That's how you win. And maybe, just maybe, he was right. To help other kids. That's what I told myself every step of the way. Senior year flew by in a blur of exams, late nights, and case reviews. I graduated summa cum laude with both of my degrees, and was officially accepted into the FBI-sponsored graduate program at Georgetown. My thesis? It focused on identifying financially motivated child abuse. I dove deep into the patterns, hundreds of cases, including my own. What started as an academic project quickly turned into a personal mission. Every red flag I found, every data point, was a child like I had once been. I was building tools to save lives, to stop the lie before it could take root. And then, in the middle of my second year of grad school, my phone rang. Agent Thorne. We made arrests, she said. Big ones. How many? 43, she replied. 12 states. Doctors, financial advisors, parents, even some government officials. It's the biggest financial child abuse case in federal history. I sat down slowly. What about the kids? That's why I'm calling, she said. We've identified 347 victims so far. They'll need evaluations, therapy, legal advocacy, ongoing support. Would you be interested in coordinating the victim services side of the investigation? 347 children. 347 kids living in the same shadow I'd lived under. Carrying labels they never asked for. Being told they were broken. Yes, I said without even thinking. Yes. Agent Thorne didn't sugarcoat it. This isn't going to be easy. Some of these kids have been manipulated for years. Some will fight us. Some families will resist intervention. I get it, I said quietly. I was one of those kids. Exactly, she replied. That's why we need you. The work started immediately, even before I finished my thesis. I met with psychologists, social workers, attorneys. We designed intake protocols, trauma-informed interview methods, re-education strategies. This wasn't just paperwork. It was rebuilding people's identities from the ground up. Our first case was Trevor, 12 years old, diagnosed with ADHD and autism. Parents had been collecting disability checks for over 6 years. Trevor wasn't violent. He wasn't developmentally delayed. He was bored. When we interviewed the family, his mother was adamant. He can't function in a normal classroom, she said. He gets disruptive. He lashes out. But while she spoke, I watched Trevor sit in the corner, quiet, focused, drawing dragons. Trevor, I asked gently, what's your favorite subject in school? He glanced up. Math, but they make me use a calculator now. They say I can't concentrate long enough to do it in my head. Can you do it in your head? He nodded, then rattled off several advanced multiplication problems. No hesitation. His parents squirmed. Well, he has good days and bad days, his dad mumbled. Trevor, I asked, do you get angry at school? Only when they put me in the special room, he said. It's boring. My friends aren't in there. Over multiple sessions, we discovered the truth. His behavior only changed when he was forced into learning environments far below his capabilities. When allowed to engage at or above grade level, he excelled. The hard part? Convincing him that he wasn't disabled. But the doctor said my brain is wrong, he told me. I had to steady my voice. Sometimes adults make mistakes. And sometimes they lie. Why would they lie? That question hit like a gut punch. I'd asked it myself for years. Because some people care more about money than about the truth. Trevor was just the beginning. The deeper I got into this work, the clearer it became. The financial fraud was only the tip of the iceberg. The real damage was psychological. These kids didn't just believe the lie. They became it. They internalized the label, the shame, the isolation. So I developed a new protocol, something I called identity reconstruction. We'd review schoolwork, hobbies, friendships. We'd find the pieces of who they were before the diagnosis and help them put it all back together. Who were you before they said you were broken? Became my first question. Sometimes, it was the first time anyone had ever asked. By the time I graduated, we'd helped 89 children rediscover who they really were. Dozens more were in process. Some families were cooperative. Others, not so much. And some kids were so deeply conditioned that progress was slow and fragile. Agent Thorne came to my graduation. "Ready for Quantico?" she asked afterward, grinning. I looked around at the professors who'd believed in me, the friends who saw me as me. "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. Quantico was brutal. Mentally, physically, emotionally. Weapons training, surveillance drills, forensic accounting, legal frameworks. Every day tested me. But the hardest part? The emotional boundaries. Learning when to connect with victims and when to stay objective. Knowing I might have to arrest people who reminded me of him. "You'll be working cases where the abusers are the parents," my instructor warned. "That's going to stir up memories." I nodded. "I've been preparing for that for 3 years. It's different with a badge and a gun," she said. "You'll have the power to arrest people like your father. That changes things." She wasn't wrong. That weight is heavy, but it also keeps you sharp. After graduation, I was placed in the Financial Crimes Division in D.C., specifically focusing on child exploitation through family-based fraud. My first major case. Private schools. We'd gotten a tip that several were falsely diagnosing students with learning disabilities so they could collect inflated state funding for special needs programs. But the truth? These kids weren't getting special education. They were getting substandard education. Sound familiar? I said to my new partner, Agent Rodriguez. "Too familiar," he muttered. We uncovered nearly 1,200 students across 4 states. Kids like Destiny. She was 14. "They told me I was too stupid for regular classes," she said during our interview. But I knew that wasn't true. I just didn't know how to prove it. "How did you know?" I asked. "Because I read college textbooks for fun. But whenever I showed them, they said it was just a savant thing. That I couldn't actually understand them." Destiny had been labeled with intellectual disability and autism. In reality, she was gifted. Her parents had trusted the school. They thought she was getting the best education possible. "We're not doctors," her mom said. We didn't question it. That trust, that's what the system exploits. It's the same thing my parents took advantage of. But Destiny's family didn't want to use her. They'd just been misled. When we finally arrested the administrators, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Closure. Because this time, I wasn't the victim. I was the one kicking down the door. The story went national. The Department of Education launched audits. Congress held hearings. And yes, I was asked to testify. "Agent Reynolds," the chair said, "your background gives you a unique perspective. What would you tell parents trying to protect their children?" I leaned into the mic. "Trust your instincts. If your child's diagnosis doesn't match what you observe at home, ask questions. Demand second opinions. Request a clear explanation for everything. What if families don't have the money for that? Then schools and agencies must provide it. No child should be labeled without independent evaluation. Ever. And what about the kids who can't advocate for themselves? That's why people like me exist. We follow the patterns. We trace the money. We protect the voiceless. Afterward, a reporter caught up to me. "Agent Reynolds," she said, "is it true you were a victim of this kind of fraud?" I nodded. Yes, I was labeled mentally ill so my parents could collect government benefits. It took me over a decade to undo the damage. How does that shape your work? It means I understand the confusion, the shame, the guilt, but it also means I know how to fight it. Do you have a message for other victims? I thought about Trevor, about Destiny, about the 347 and the 1,200, about all the kids still waiting to be heard. You are not your diagnosis, I said. You are not the label someone put on you for a check. You are not too broken to be seen. And you're not alone anymore. The interview aired nationwide. Within 24 hours, our office got over 300 calls. From families, from whistleblowers, from victims. Agent Rodriguez looked at me over the stack of reports. "Well," he said, "looks like you started something." I smiled. "Good," I said. "It's about damn time." 6 months after the school case, I was promoted. Senior Special Agent. And with that came something even bigger. Command of a brand new federal task force. One solely dedicated to investigating child exploitation tied to financial crimes. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a mission. My team? Handpicked. Experts in financial forensics, digital recovery, psychology, and education law. We were the first task force of our kind. Ever. Our mandate? Broad. Necessary. Urgent. Disability fraud. Education funding scams. Insurance abuse. Custody manipulation. Medical falsification. If it involved exploiting kids for money, we were on it. "This is groundbreaking," Director Harrison told me during our first briefing. "There's no playbook for this." I didn't even blink. "Then we'll write one." He gave me a look. Every state's flagged potential cases. Thousands of children. You ready for that kind of load? I nodded. Then we'd better get started. Assembling the task force felt like building a strike team for the most important war I'd ever fight. Agent Sarah Kim, brilliant forensic accountant. She could track dirty money across shell corporations and crypto wallets like she had a sixth sense for it. Agent Michael Torres, digital forensics wizard. Encrypted drives, deleted messages, buried metadata? He could bring them back from the dead. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, clinical psychologist with a trauma-informed background. She helped us develop intervention protocols that worked, that healed. Agent David Chen, our legal maestro. He made sure our cases stuck, that our evidence held, that our charges didn't just land, they slammed. Our first big investigation? Massive. A network spanning 23 states. Over 50 defendants. Parents, doctors, school staff, even a few local officials. Here's how it worked. Recruiters targeted struggling families, mostly single moms, low income, desperate. They'd offer free evaluations for kids. Said it was about identifying learning challenges, giving their child a leg up. Sounds helpful, right? Except the professionals were in on it. The evaluations were a scam. Kids were labeled with every diagnosis under the sun: ADHD, autism, ODD, learning disabilities, behavioral disorders. Didn't matter if they had symptoms or not. Everyone got the same result. Then came the coaching. The parents were told how to file for disability payments, how to request special ed placements, how to apply for supplemental income programs. They were sold the idea that this was helping their child succeed. But in reality, those kids were being crushed, placed in classrooms far below their capability, medicated unnecessarily, labeled, stigmatized, socially isolated, pushed into programs they didn't need. Meanwhile, the professionals collected fees, ongoing services. Some even got kickbacks from pharma companies. The kids, they got robbed of their futures. "I've never seen anything like this," Agent Kim said as we reviewed the financials. "This isn't just fraud," Dr. Walsh said. "This is psychological warfare. On children. Agent Torres looked up. How many kids are we talking? I pulled up the preliminary report. Best estimate? Between 2 and 3,000. Over the last 7 years. The room went silent. 3,000. Agent Chen echoed. Minimum, I said. And that's just this one network. 2 years. That's how long it took to unravel everything. We worked with schools, state boards, advocacy groups. We sifted through medical records, financial audits, witness statements. But the hardest part was the families. Some of them knew. Others didn't. Others had genuinely believed the diagnoses. Believed they were doing what was best. We met one mother, her daughter Maria, had been diagnosed with autism at age 5. She'd spent 2 years in self-contained classrooms and had been receiving disability benefits ever since. When we told the mom that the diagnosis was false, she pushed back hard. But Maria needs these services, she insisted. She can't function without them. Dr. Walsh kept her voice calm. Then let's test that theory. We had Maria spend time in a mainstream classroom with proper support but no label. Within weeks, she was thriving. No outbursts, no meltdowns, no delays. One day, she completed a full math worksheet on her own and beamed up at us. I can do math, she said. I just pretended I couldn't, 'cause the doctor said I had to need help. I swallowed hard. Why would you pretend? 'Cause mommy was sad when I acted normal, she said. She said if I act sick, we get money for food. 7 years old. And already trained to fake symptoms for survival. That's when I realized this wasn't just financial. It was emotional, identity-based. It was conditioning. Recovery couldn't be just removing the fake diagnosis. We needed to teach these kids and their families how to function without the fraud. Dr. Walsh and I designed a protocol called Graduated Authenticity. Step by step, it eased kids out of artificial supports and back into real life. Real classrooms, real expectations, real potential. For parents, we created educational programs. How to identify real learning needs. How to parent without leaning on a diagnosis. How to see your child clearly. In total, 43 people were convicted. Sentences ranged from 3 to 25 years. The courts ordered $47 million in restitution to victims and government agencies. But the most important number? Over 1,800 children. That's how many we helped restore. Not every case was a success. Some kids had been so thoroughly broken down that healing would take years. Some might never fully come back. But most of them were just like Trevor, like Destiny, like Maria, normal, brilliant, capable, just never given the chance to believe it. At the final case review meeting, I stood in front of my team. What we're doing here, I said, isn't just about locking people up. It's about changing how the world sees abuse. Agent Torres leaned forward. What do you mean? For too long, financial crimes against kids have been brushed off, treated like paperwork, numbers, bureaucracy. But we know the truth. Dr. Walsh nodded. The trauma's real. Exactly, I said. Every fraudulent diagnosis, every false claim. It's a cage, a mental cage. And when you teach a child they're broken, when you profit from that lie, it's not a spreadsheet crime. It's child abuse. Period. Agent Kim tapped her pen against her notes. Well, now we've got the data and the legal precedent. And now we've got a team who knows how to fight it, Agent Chen added. The success of our task force didn't go unnoticed. Within 3 years, we'd grown to 12 full-time agents and opened offices in 4 regions. We investigated over 200 cases, helped more than 5,000 children. 5,000. I was promoted again supervisory special agent. And with it, I was tasked with building a national training program for law enforcement. You're building a legacy, Director Harrison said during my review. I shook my head. I'm building a protection system, I told him. One that makes what happened to me, and to those kids, impossible to repeat. He gave me a long look. You think that's realistic? I smiled. I think it's necessary. 10 years into my career as a federal agent, I got a lunch invitation from someone who had changed my life. Agent Thorne, now Assistant Director Thorne. We met at a quiet cafe in the city. She looked almost the same, sharp, steady, always scanning the room without making it obvious. Halfway through our meal, she set her fork down and leaned forward. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found those medical records? God, that question. I thought about it more times than I could count. I probably would have gone to community college, I said slowly. Majored in something practical, maybe accounting. I'd have believed I was mentally ill for the rest of my life. Would have carried that lie like a scar. And the thousands of kids you've helped? They'd still be trapped, just like I was. Thorne nodded. The networks we've dismantled? They operated for decades before anyone caught on. She paused, then asked gently, any regrets? I thought about that seriously. My 20s and 30s were a blur of late nights, case files, and courtroom testimony. I missed birthdays, weddings. I'd had a few relationships, but nothing lasting. Nothing I let get close enough to distract me from the mission. But I also knew how many lives we'd changed. How many children we'd freed from lives that weren't theirs to live. No, I said. No regrets. She smiled. So, what's next for you? I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I want to go back to school, get a PhD in criminology, build better frameworks for understanding financial child abuse. And someday, I hesitated. I want to run for Congress. Thorne raised an eyebrow. From victim to investigator to policymaker. From victim to protector, I corrected. That evening I took a detour. I hadn't been back to my old neighborhood in years. The house where I grew up, it looked smaller, less intimidating. There was a new family living there now. A young couple. Their kids were playing in the yard. Little shoes scattered across the driveway. A soccer ball rolling toward the curb. Just normal. And that was what I'd fought for. What all of this had been about. Giving kids the chance to grow up without lies. Without labels. Without being turned into someone else's income stream. As I sat there in my car watching those kids laugh, my phone buzzed. A text. From Marcus. Saw your interview on 60 Minutes. Mom would have been proud. Mom. She'd passed away 3 years ago while Dad was still in prison. I'd gone to her funeral but barely spoke to him. He'd been allowed to attend under guard. In her final years, Mom had done volunteer work with abused children. Maybe her way of making amends. I never fully forgave her, but I think I understood her. She was a victim too. Thanks, I texted back. She made her own choices, but I think she tried at the end. Then another text came through. Speaking of Dad, he's up for parole next year. That hit me like ice water. I know. Victim Services already reached out. Are you going? I looked back at that house. At the window of the room where I used to read books and wonder why no one saw me for who I really was. Yes, I replied. I have some things to say to him. The parole hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in federal court. The same courtroom where I'd helped put dozens of criminals away. The same one where he had once stood in shackles. Now it was his turn again. He looked older, smaller, gray. Like time had worn him down in ways I couldn't have imagined. When they called my name, I stepped up to the podium and looked straight at him. 15 years ago, I said, voice clear, you pointed a loaded gun at me and a federal agent rather than face the consequences of your actions. Today, I'm a federal agent. And I'm here to make sure this board understands the full impact of what you did. I talked for 10 minutes. I told them about the fake diagnoses, about the years of self-doubt, about the children who believed they were broken because of networks like his. You didn't just steal money, I said. You stole my childhood, my sense of self. You taught me to see myself as defective. And the truth is, I don't oppose your parole out of revenge. I oppose it because you still haven't shown any real understanding of the damage you caused. Until you recognize that your crime wasn't just financial, but psychological, you remain a danger. He was allowed to respond. He stood slowly, hands trembling slightly. I'm proud of who you became, he said, even if I don't deserve any credit for it. You're right, I said. You don't. I won't ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know. I regret it. All of it. Not a day goes by that I don't regret what I did to you. Regret, I said, isn't the same as understanding. No, he whispered. It's not. But maybe it's a start. The board deliberated for less than an hour. Parole denied. He would serve at least 3 more years before becoming eligible again. After the hearing, I walked out of the courtroom into the same parking lot where it had all started for me. I called Dr. Martinez, my old professor, my mentor, my guide through all of this. How do you feel? She asked. Lighter, I said. Like I finally shut a door that's been open for 20 years. There was a pause. And the next door? I looked back at the courthouse, the same building where I'd once testified as a teenager. The place where I'd become this version of myself. I think I'm finally ready to write that PhD proposal, I said. Focus on prevention. On building systems that catch this before it happens. Prevention instead of prosecution? Both, I said, but with more emphasis on identifying these patterns before they ruin a child's life. And as I stood there with the weight of that courtroom behind me, I realized something. This wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the start of the next one. The PhD program at Georgetown accepted my proposal. My dissertation, a deep dive into the systematic prevention of financial child exploitation, its policies, failures, and future. It was the culmination of everything I'd lived, everything I'd investigated. To do it right, I took a leave from the FBI, stepped back from the field so I could focus solely on the research, the writing, the truth. What I found was both horrifying and oddly hopeful, because in case after case, the warning signs had been there, hiding in plain sight, but our systems weren't designed to catch them. Not because they couldn't, but because no one had tried. But the hope? That part came from what I discovered next. Most of it could have been prevented. Simple reforms. Smart tech. Better oversight. That was the answer. I wrote. The fraud is usually hiding in plain sight. A child with multiple diagnoses from a single evaluator. A family with luxury expenses but minimal reported income. A doctor who shows up in dozens of similar cases. Ongoing benefits despite lack of documented support services. My data showed that with basic automation, we could flag potentially fraudulent cases with 89% accuracy. That meant no need to surveil every family. Just the ones that matched known patterns of abuse. Prevention is possible, I told my committee. We've just never had the system or the will to act early. My dissertation defense landed on December 15th. Exactly 20 years to the day since I stood at my family's kitchen table and confronted my parents with the truth. Poetic, isn't it? After the presentation, Dr. Reynolds, the committee chair, leaned back in his seat. This has real-world potential, he said. Have you thought about how to implement it? I have, I replied. I want to propose federal legislation requiring every federal disability program involving children to integrate automated fraud detection. He raised his eyebrows. That's ambitious. No, I said. It's necessary, because every day we delay, more kids are labeled. More lives are derailed. The vote was unanimous. I graduated with a PhD in criminology. My specialty? Financial crimes against children. Agent Thorne was there. Of course she was. She hugged me after the ceremony and grinned. Ready to change the world, Dr. Reynolds? Ready to try, I said. 3 months later, I stood before the House Subcommittee on Crime and Federal Government Surveillance. Congress. The subcommittee chair looked at me over a thick folder of reports. Dr. Reynolds, your research suggests thousands of children are actively being harmed through these schemes. What should Congress be doing? I'd been ready for this moment my whole life. Pass legislation, I said. Require automated fraud detection in every federal program that provides financial benefits for children with disabilities. These systems don't investigate families. They flag suspicious patterns before the damage is done. And the cost? Another rep asked. About $50 million a year, I said. But right now, We spend over $200 million annually investigating and prosecuting these cases after the harm is done. Representative Johnson nodded. So prevention is more efficient. And more humane, I said. Every child we protect from false diagnoses is a child who gets to grow up believing in who they actually are. The Child Protection from Financial Exploitation Act passed with bipartisan support. 6 months later, it was signed into law. Marcus called me the day it passed. You did it, he said. You actually changed federal law. We did it, I told him. Every agent, every victim advocate, every survivor, everyone who refused to stay silent. So what's next? I looked around my office, my FBI commendation, my framed law degree, the signed legislation that now bore my name as lead consultant. Implementation, I said, and that's exactly what I did. I returned to the FBI, this time as Deputy Assistant Director. My job? Oversee the nationwide rollout of the new fraud detection systems. It wasn't glamorous. No dramatic arrests. No undercover busts. Instead, it was coding algorithms, configuring data access, training analysts, coordinating with state agencies. Bureaucratic, tedious, but critical. 6 months in, I sat across from Director Harrison with our first report. In that time, I said, the system flagged 1,047 suspicious cases. Of those, 123 were confirmed fraud. We prevented nearly $43 million in fraudulent benefits. And more importantly, protected 2,891 children. He leaned back, impressed. Nearly 3,000 kids spared the trauma. That's extraordinary. It's a good start, I said. But the federal programs are just part of the picture. We need detection systems at the state level, in schools, even in private medical practice. What would that take? Money, training, and a lot of political will. He raised an eyebrow. And how do we convince states this matters? I didn't hesitate. We tell the kids stories. So that's what I did. I spent the next year traveling across the country, speaking at conferences, training officers and agents, testifying before committees. And everywhere I went, I brought the truth. Not stats, not theory, stories. This is Marcus, I'd say, pointing to a bright-eyed teenage boy, diagnosed with severe autism, 8 years of disability benefits. But in reality, he's gifted, and now enrolled in an accelerated engineering program. This is Sophia, 4 years of intellectual disability payments. She's now in honors biology and wants to be a pediatrician. This is Cameron. He was medicated from age 6 to 14 for ADHD and behavioral issues. Turned out he was reacting to abuse at home. He's now safe and thriving. When people saw the children, not just the fraud, they listened. Within 3 years, every state had adopted some version of the fraud detection system. Automated monitoring became standard practice. The results? Astounding. New cases dropped by 76%. Fraud recovery increased 340%. And most importantly, thousands of children were never labeled, never medicated unnecessarily, never told they were broken. One day, I got a call from Dr. Martinez, my old professor from undergrad. You've created an entirely new field, he said. Financial child abuse prevention is now a recognized specialty in criminology. I smiled. I didn't do it alone. No, he said, but you had the vision, and you didn't stop. That matters. And he was right, because in the end, all I ever wanted was to stop what happened to me from happening to anyone else. And now, we were finally making that a reality. On the morning of my 40th birthday, I got a call I wasn't expecting. Is this Dr. Meredith Reynolds? A young man's voice asked. Yes, it is. This is Trevor Coleman. You worked on my case. About 15 years ago. Trevor. I felt my chest tighten. He was 12 when I met him. Diagnosed with ADHD and autism, medicated, isolated, when in reality he was just a bright kid who loved math and video games. Of course I remember you, I said. How have you been? I'm graduating from MIT next month. Computer science. I blinked. MIT? He laughed. Yeah. I just wanted to thank you for giving me my life back. I felt my throat tighten. I didn't give it back to you, I told him. You reclaimed it. I just helped get the lies out of your way. There was a pause. Then he said, I've followed everything you've done. The legislation, the fraud detection, the training systems. Do you have any idea how many kids you've saved? I shook my head. Thousands, I hope. Try tens of thousands, he said. Your work, it created ripple effects. Changed policy. Changed how people see kids like me. You saved kids who don't even know they needed saving. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, staring out the window, thinking back, thinking about the day I found my fake medical file in my father's cabinet, thinking about how helpless I'd felt. And now I was sitting in a federal office, surrounded by case files, research briefs, and systems we'd built from the ground up. We hadn't fixed everything, not even close. There were still children falling through the cracks. Some schemes had grown more sophisticated. Some families were so isolated that the systems never even had a chance to flag them. But Trevor was right. We changed the battlefield. Financial child abuse was no longer something invisible, no longer something buried in bureaucracy. It was being named, prosecuted, prevented. Children like I once was quiet, observant, simply trying to survive now had real shields, real protection. My phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. Dr. Reynolds, my name is Jessica Chin. I think my parents might be doing something like what happened to you. Can you help me? My heart dropped. Even after all these years, children were still finding a way to ask for help. Still reaching out with quiet courage, even when they didn't have the words yet to describe what was wrong. I replied immediately, yes, I can help you. Call this number. It'll connect you directly to our victim services coordinator. And then, I sat there, staring at the screen, because even with all the systems, all the laws, all the progress, some things hadn't changed. There were still parents who saw their children as financial opportunities, still loopholes being exploited, still kids trying to make sense of why the people who were supposed to love them were using them instead. But you know what else hadn't changed? Me. 23 years after opening that cabinet and finding a paper trail of lies, I was still here, still fighting, still listening, still believing kids when no one else did. The difference now, I wasn't fighting alone. We had fraud detection. We had federal legislation. We had prosecutors, investigators, doctors, and caseworkers trained to see past the paperwork and ask the real questions. And sometimes we had people like me, people who had lived it. I picked up Jessica's case file and opened it, scanning the first page. A quiet knock came at the door. Agent Torres peeked in. You coming to the cake thing? I smiled faintly. In a minute, because I still had work to do, and someone somewhere still needed help.